And thank you for staying with us as we continue our coverage of the coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19 here, and how it's actually affecting New York City and across the nation. The death toll across the United States, 100,000 people. People are forced to social distance. And the question here in New York is, how can the city recover from the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, joining us now to share a little bit more and talk front and center on the issue, we are pleased to have the associate editorial page editor of the New York Post, Michael Benjamin, who joins us now to share a little bit about his take on the COVID-19 recovery. And Mike, good to have you.
Glad to be here. Glad to be around. Glad
Yeah,
to be virus free.
yeah, and I mean, and that's no joke. I mean, when you think about it, a lot of people infected, a lot of people affected. As I said in the lead, 100,000 people across the United States have lost their lives, and most of those deaths coming right here in New York City. So I'll throw the optimum question out there: how does the city recover from this?
Well, it recovers by going back to work. There's the governor has kept his word. There's been a lot more. There's a lot more testing available. I think New Yorkers, myself included, ought to be tested whether or not we've had symptoms, just to make sure that either we may have had it, but then we developed the antibodies and we've recovered from it. That'll be important. Be important opening up work sites and going back to work, and people feeling comfortable going to work and not worried about their health, worried about infecting their older parents or folks who in the neighborhood, or other folks who may have pre-existing conditions that could be susceptible and vulnerable to to getting sick from the virus, because there is the likelihood over the next year or two for there to be a second and a third wave of the virus and people getting sick as they did during the Spanish influenza about 100 years ago.
Yeah, but talk to me about this problem. We talked about this here on the show several times. The funds, right? Small Business Association, and the funds that were supposed to be coming this way to help with businesses. The New York City gets 70%. The Bronx gets left out. Other parts of the city are left out. But we talk about economic recovery. How hard is it going to be for businesses to recover, especially if they even can't get these loans?
It'll be difficult for those who need the loan money to keep themselves afloat, to pay their rent. It's gonna be hard, and landlords aren't willing to, wait until September, October for me to get my money together in order for me to pay my rent and to catch up. It's gonna be hard. It's. I mean, I was talking to City Councilman Mark Jonai, who heads the City Council's Small Business Committee, and he was just livid about the amount of the few Bronx-based businesses that got some of the city's money to try to recover. I mean, it's shameful that the bigger folks with the lobbyists and with the big banks who do all the paperwork for them are able to get the money when it's really the small guys and small mom and pops and the others, immigrants and others who need the money now in order to keep the businesses afloat. The governor and the mayor wanting to go slow and reopening across the board, it's going to hurt these guys. It's not good. We're talking not just, I mean, the deli guys, the supermarkets, they're fortunate they were able to be open in the last 2 months. But the guy who has a barber shop, the beauty salon, the clothing store, I mean, they've got it rough. They have rent to pay. They have employees to bring back. They have stock to buy. They're not getting help, and they need the help. It's not just the federal money; it's what the city can make available. And then we also have the other whammy of the state and city budgets being hit. I mean, the city budget has to be passed in, I guess, later this month in order for the next fiscal year, and the mayor is hasn't even talked about the necessary budget cuts to make it possible. And a lot of the cuts could come in small businesses.
Right. City and state. We talked about the budget cuts, and this budget, we've talked from Speaker Hasty on down about hard cuts that had to be made. Giving a financial forecast for the next couple of years, with the fact that New York has declared itself broke, what can we expect? I mean, it's going to be rough to live in New York these next couple of years.
It's going to be rough. It's the same thing as if we had a very deep recession like the one we had back in 2008 that lasted for at least 2 or 3 years before we began to see recovery, and recovery taking off during the last 4 years of the Trump administration. Things that are put in place, more people were finding employment. And the shameful thing is that as more African Americans and Latinos were finding work across the country, this thing breaks out, and now a lot of folks who had found jobs and were employed finally and doing well for their families, were knocked off their heels again. This is something that really, really requires help. The federal government needs to do much more, and the president needs to stop playing politics and talking about not wanting to bail out the so-called blue states. the states where Americans live, and he should be interested in helping all Americans get back on their feet to recover the economy and to be helpful and to set aside his political rhetoric, his political enemies list, and talk about how to help the country recover. To work with governors, with Governor Cuomo, with Governor Phil Murphy in New Jersey and others, and working with the mayor of the city of New York to try to help the city recover. And I think the governor had a good idea. It was getting the federal government to fund some of the infrastructure projects like the Gateway Tunnel, other things that need to get done that could put many more people to work, and that would be helpful. And the governor also has to ease up on some of these restrictions and allow New York City to begin to reopen, and maybe cut some of the phases that he's looking at in half, and getting people back to work. Let people use their own discretion as to whether or not they feel comfortable coming into work, and allow companies to decide how they want to do the social distancing, whether or not they want to bring 50% of their staff back to do the work in order to help them feel comfortable and safe.
Yeah, given this weekend, given what's happened around the country, the protests in regards to George Floyd, coronavirus pandemic is still out here. The question I think a lot of people are going to ask is, in 14 days, can we see increased rates of infection, community spread? How much more does this set the city, the state, and the country back if we find more people out here with community spread?
Yeah, that was the thing that really bothered me when I saw people not just the protesting. That's fine because many folks were wearing masks, but then as you get more agitated and you get confrontation and people remove their masks, they shout at the police, shout at each other. You're spreading the possibility of spreading the virus to others, and then taking it back home. The folks who weren't out protesting, your grandparents, other folks who have health considerations, can now possibly be exposed. I heard the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, this morning talking about how she fears a second wave in her city because people did not observe social distancing. Some didn't wear a mask, and she's now concerned that not only has to deal with the city that parts of it were burning, and now people may also become sick and begin to overwhelm the hospitals in the next few weeks. And that's something we need to be aware of. And it would be a shame if that were to happen, to set New York City back even further, and set back the minority communities in New York back further, because we've been the most affected. But the demonstrations in the Bronx that I've seen in the news and in reports have not been as wild as they were in Brooklyn and in Lower Manhattan. But it's quite possible, some Bronx residents were at those demonstrations and those riots at night, and who knows what they may be bringing back home to their residents. I'm hoping that many more people were actually exposed to the virus earlier, they developed antibodies, and the level of transmission may not be as high. But we won't know the science of it for another month or two.
Yeah, I want to get your take on what the events of this past weekend. I think, we had Shavana Newsom on earlier talking about what the situation was with Black Lives Matter protesters in New York City. We talked about the looting, we talked about that, but I want to talk about the NYPD and some of their response. I think one of the most vivid was that police cruiser that is actually running into barricades. Your thoughts, your take on the NYPD's handling of the protest this weekend?
The barricade incident is one of several. I don't necessarily think it's the worst. I think the macing and pepper spraying of Brooklyn State Senator Zelnor Myrie, who was peacefully demonstrating with his constituents, he was pepper sprayed for no apparent reason.
Another individual, and I don't mean to cut you off, and had on a fluorescent shirt saying that he was the senator.
Yes. Right. Yes, and and he had other innocents. Of one young man, I don't know what he was saying to the police, but he was wearing his mask. He kept his distance. He wasn't throwing anything at them, and an officer reached over, pulled out his mask, and pepper sprayed him in his nose and mouth. I mean, those are horrible incidents. The commissioner tried to excuse the two cars that went through the crowd, saying that the night before other police cars had been attacked with Molotov cocktails, and they felt they were being surrounded, and they didn't want to take a chance with their own lives, and their own families wanted to return home safely. That's something that the police need to investigate. The governor has said he's going to have Letitia James, the Attorney General, look into these police activities and actions. And the mayor yesterday said he appointed the commissioner of the Department of Investigation and the head of the Corporation Council to investigate, independently review police actions over the weekend, and to see if anything transpired that may require interventions. The Brooklyn DA, Eric Gonzalez, has opened a hotline and email tip line to get information from people who want to put forward accusations of police brutality regarding demonstrations. So there's an effort to at least listen to the public and to take their complaints. There was a recent court ruling, I believe on Friday, that allows the CCRB, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, to take complaints from people who only witnessed a video That doesn't necessarily have to be witnesses there at the live event. If they saw it in the video and they can identify the police officers, then they're allowed to submit to them their complaint, and the CCRB can pursue it. Of course, the PBA is opposed to it, as well as the other police unions think it's just another effort by the CCRB, to taint cops is bad. But the
Yeah.
public saw what they saw, and there are police officers who overreacted. I don't think those who overreacted represent the vast majority of police officers who want to have a safe city, who want to protect life and property. And then you have to deal with persons who seems or their only intent is to go out and agitate the police, agitate crowds, and to try to create some level of confrontation and destruction, and try to paint the police as being entirely awful.
Yeah. How does the city recover through this? Given the fact that you've got the protests, you got the rioting, you got the looting, you got the coronavirus, we are really dealing with a lot. And so, what do you feel are going to be next steps moving forward in terms of navigating through the protest process and then also the pandemic?
Well, the next steps are going to be, leadership. From the mayor on down. The mayor, city council president, public advocate Jamani Williams, Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. in leading the city, leading the borough, and getting people to calm down, getting the police, getting valid complaints against police officers for police brutality properly adjudicated, and people feeling a sense of justice. This is not the sort of thing I would think that George Floyd or his family and his brother Terrence was on TV yesterday saying. This is not being done in his brother's name or memory. His brother was a peaceful individual. He would not have supported what's been going on. I mean, the rioting, the looting of stores, the burning of Black and Hispanic and Asian stores doesn't help anyone. That's not striking back against the system. That's not striking back against police brutality. That's not striking back against inequality. It's utter criminality, and it's not helpful to the Black community or Hispanic community. It should be about turning things around. The New York City government is predominantly minority. The city council is majority Black, Hispanic, and Asian. The mayor happens to be white, but he also is married to an African American woman. He has some level of sensitivity to the community issues. Yes, he's supporting his police officers and what they're trying to accomplish because he knows that they're trying to do what's best for people. Those who have taken the law in their own hands and acted irresponsibly, they'll be investigated and properly punished.
Yeah.
And
But
people have to be. We also can't forget that yes, there's a pandemic still in existence. We want to get back to our lives, but our lives do not include, destruction and the loss of life because you're angry at something that happened in Minnesota. We know what happened in Eric Garner case. We know New York is trying to make things better. One of the things I read about over the weekend that was hopeful was that what happened in Flint, Michigan, the police and the sheriff's department actually marched with the protesters. In Camden, New Jersey, they did the same thing. I mean, Camden was so bad at one time, they had to fire the entire police department and start from scratch.
mhm,
And because they did that about 5 or 6 years ago, things are much better in that city. I think the mayor and the commissioner here in New York can learn something from their colleagues in Camden and in Flint, Michigan, to help to calm things here in New York. I grew up in New York during the '77 blackout and doing the things that were happening. I mean, we've recovered from that. It took us a long time to recover. I'm hoping this will not require the same sort of process. It's been low. It's been isolated to a couple of neighborhoods in Brooklyn and Lower Manhattan. Hopefully, it won't be that bad. Hopefully, people will also be able to maintain their health. We won't have this second wave of health devastation from the coronavirus. We need to
yeah.
keep moving forward. We need to see leadership from the mayor. He needs to be out in the street talking to people. I mean, as it was yesterday, I saw a report where his daughter Chiara was arrested
Yeah,
last night for blocking the street.
I don't mean to cut you off. I was getting ready. That was the next question I was going to ask because we only have about 2 minutes left. Yes, that was the mayor's daughter who got arrested. What does that do for the mayor? What does that do for optics? What does that do for his leadership question?
Well, one, his daughter apparently wasn't doing anything violent. She was blocking the street, which is civil disobedience, which is regarded as one of the things that you can do legally to make your voices heard. She wasn't arrested for throwing a Molotov cocktail. She wasn't arrested for cursing at police officers. She was arrested for a peaceful demonstration in the middle of the street. Some of the cynics might think that her dad put her up to it. I don't happen to believe that's the case. I believe she's a woman of her own mind, her own rights, and she went out last night with her friends and others to protest against what's been happening. And she did what she thought was appropriate. And she did not seek to identify herself as the mayor's daughter. She didn't seek any special privileges, from what I read. And she was released along with the others who were arrested and booked. And we'll see what transpired. I don't think the mayor gets any additional street cred for having a daughter who demonstrates. I just wish you'd stop talking about his 2 black children. They're his 2 children. It doesn't matter how they identify or what they look like. It's that they're his children, and they have a right to demonstrate. They have a right to be concerned about how the police regard them and their peers.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, in this day and age, race does matter, and it does. And you hear comments about, black, white, this, that, and the mayor oftentimes does refer to his daughter as his black child. And in the hearts and minds of some black people, that loses street cred all by itself.
You can't overplay that. You can't overplay that hand. You just be the mayor and do what you can for everybody, and be even-handed and show leadership and get off TV, get out in the street, talk to people, walk the streets or other elected officials, and lead. And he hasn't been doing that recently. I believe he was out yesterday, but he needs to do much more of that and leave the news conferences to the governor talking about coronavirus and govern the city of New York and get his police folks in line and vow that he would make sure that all the officers who misbehave, are reassigned or they're fired if it's really egregious. Mayor Lance Bottoms in Atlanta, she had the 2 officers who assaulted the 2 college students in their cars yesterday with pepper spray and with tasers. They were fired for that.
Right.
Others have been reassigned. She took the bull by the horns and said, "Look, I'm not in support of rioting and looting and violence. I'm also not in support of police officers who violate the rules and go out of their way to make people hurt and to make the situation worse." To me, that's leadership, and the mayor of New York needs to show similar leadership.
Well, certainly, Mike, we want to thank you for sharing with us. We got to bring you back again as we continue to talk about the issues that are affecting our city, particularly the coronavirus, and definitely all the events of this past weekend. Michael Benjamin, our guest, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Looking forward again. Thanks.
All righty. Michael Benjamin, our guest. Listen, stay with us. We do have more show. We're coming up right after this.